I believe that phrasing is the most important element of your guitar solo, not licks or scales or anything like that. But the question comes up, how do we develop our phrasing? So today I want to discuss a couple different elements that I use to help develop my phrasing, particularly based off this little solo right here. As you can see, it's pretty simple, but there's a lot of concepts baked in. And this approach is very different than our common trying to play fast, cool licks or find the perfect note and do all this kind of complicated stuff, right? Good phrasing is at the heart of our solos, and it's actually a very simple thing. So today we're going to quickly go through that solo, then we're going to analyze it, look at the chord progression, look at the timing, the phrasing, what intervals are being hit, and then we'll look at 5 great ways to work on your phrasing. So not only can you leave today with a couple more phrases under your belt, but also a couple great ways to throw into your day-to-day practice to help develop this. All right, so let's just go ahead and dive into it. So this solo is in E minor. Mainly, I'm focusing on this position 3 box of E minor pentatonic. So I start this little phrase off on the D string of the 7th fret with a quick slide to the 9th fret. And I actually end up holding that out for over a measure, and we'll analyze that a little bit more later. The next phrase looks something like this. So that's 8, but really fast slide to 7, pulling off the 5 on the D string. Then back to 7, and then middle finger goes 7, which is our root note, of the A string. Then the 5 of the D string, 7, slide 9. So far. And then right back to... I'm going back to the 7th fret, picking that, and then a quick slide up, right back to 7. Pull off 5, then 7th fret of the A string to 7th fret of the E string, then jumping to the D string 5, and then rolling up to 5 of the A, and then 7 on the A. So that second little phrase, which is quite a bit more complicated, is this. One more time. Put it together with the first note. We have this. Now we hold that note out for a bit, and we get a little weird with this one. Right, so it starts off, I'm almost walking an E minor arpeggio in a way, but then I'm going to the C note instead of what would be the B note typically. So I'm repicking 7, 5 on the D, 5 on the G, which is our C note, which we'll get into a little later, which is kind of weird. Then that will eventually slide back to 4. Quick pause, pick 7 of the D string, pull off the 5. And then 7 of the G, slide up to 9. And pull off the 7, so. And then back to the D string. Alright, so let's play through the solo real quick, everything all together, and then we're going to go to the analyzing phase. Also, tab for today's lesson is on my Patreon. The link is down below. All right, now let's kind of analyze this. We know the phrase now. It's very, very simple. Not much going on. Let's analyze. We're going to look at the chord progression, of course. Then we're going to analyze the kind of intervals that are happening based off each chord. And then we're going to look at the timing of the phrases and also maybe repetition of phrases and see how that affects the overall sound of the phrase. Then after that, we'll go into ways to start practicing this where you can just on the spot improvise phrases like this. So if you're looking at the tab, the chord progression is very, very simple. It's E minor for a measure to B minor for a measure, and then 2 measures of A minor, and that just repeats twice. So for the first note of the phrase, I just did the classic start on the root note, and just kind of go from there. Now, one thing I did do, because it has this track has a laid back kind of vibe to it, is I didn't come in strong on the downbeat, and we'll get to more of this a little bit later. I kind of hesitated. It has a little drag to it, and it's almost like if we're analyzing in a call and response fashion, it's kind of like saying, hey, it's like it's just starting the conversation, starting the story a little bit. Just kind of letting that sit. Now, for the whole entire B minor chord, I'm still just holding that note out. Then it goes to A minor, and then finally, this is where I start this next phrase. And an important note, when we hit this note, that G note right there is on the chord change back to the E minor. So it's at the top of the progression again, at the restart of the progression. Notice I'm starting off with a lot of space. There's a lot of space, and I'm letting the track do what it wants to. On those downbeats of the chord changes, I'm letting the chord do its thing. I'm staying out of the way of that. It hits the E minor. Right, we're staying out of the way of the chord change until that A minor comes back. Now with this phrase that happens over the A minor, this one, even though I'm starting on resolution, I'm kind of plotting around that of the A note. So, you know, we're hearing the minor 7 here, you're hearing the 5 later on. Then I slide up to the 9 over the A, which is a very cool sound. Now the last note, the last few notes over the A chord as it's going back to the E, we get this. So we're hearing the minor 7 over A, the 5, and then the 9 again, or the second. Now jumping back to this G note here, and it's crazy how the G note, because at first here, that was over the A, so we're getting this kind of sound. Right, so that's what's happening over the A if we play the A for the resolution there. But then as it moves to E, we're getting this same note now sounds like this. It's now the minor 3rd, right? So in this one little phrase, because I went back to that note again, even though it's the same note, it doesn't have the same intervallic sound. It goes from a minor 7 sound to a minor 3rd. So that's also why we're phrasing. It's good to play the same notes over and over again, because as the progression changes, if we lean into that, the sound is changing. And we'll get into this a little bit more later, but we don't want to necessarily just target intervals of the same chord, because the same note over different chords is creating different sounds. It actually sounds very unique and very pleasant, just like this does. That's 2 different sounds, right? If I just played minor 3rds of each, it's different notes, but it's actually the same sound. It's the same intervallic story that's being told. So sometimes it's good to hit the same notes at different times. Now, I think this is a cool kind of centering around that E minor chord again. Intervallic, we have the minor 3rd to minor 7 to root. And are also getting like a pentatonic surround, right? So we start from a note above the E note in the pentatonic scale, which is our 3rd, minor 3rd. Then we go to a note below, which is our minor 7. Then we're walking up. I think that's a really, really cool sound. Right here, how these are dissonant. Then it resolves. It's very, very cool. Now, I almost don't play anything over this B minor again, but I do kind of do this walk up into the A minor chord that happens. But really what's very interesting about that note is not in the pentatonic scale, it's in the minor scale, but it's as it's changing chords. It happens a little bit before, but it's holding out as it's changing to the A minor. So we're actually are now hearing the minor third over A. So we hear it over B for a moment, and then it moves to that. So that's kind of cool sometimes to hit an interval before it kind of becomes the right interval, if that makes sense. We're going, right? It sounds very dissonant for a moment, a little out there. Then as the chord changes, it sounds perfect because it's that minor third. Not doing much, it's just placing those notes over those particular chords as they're moving. Then I end up sliding back. Just classic pentatonic phrase there. Actually, sliding to the fifth now, so that's the E note, which is the root of the key, but not over the chord. So we're now hearing this over the A. Which is very pleasant phrases. Then still over the A we go. And then we end. We actually end on the fifth of E, which is our B note. Which is very pleasant as well. Now, I want to point out some kind of repetitive movements that I ended up doing, which I think repetitive movements in your phrasing is very, very important too, because it gives the listener something to kind of connect with. It's almost like a verse or a chorus of a song. Most verse and choruses, they follow the same rhythmic kind of scheme, and it makes it very catchy and very memorable to the ear. If we're always playing new notes and new phrases and new ways of doing things, it gets confusing. It's hard to follow. So just starting off, there's a couple slides I do. One to start off. Later we do a slide on the D string. Later again we do a slide back to the E note here on the G string. So we're hearing this slide, kind of whole step slide repetition, but also this is like a very repetitive phrase I'll do here. Right, we see that over the first A minor chord, but then we see that exact thing again over the last A minor chord. And what's kind of wild is the first time I do it on measure 3 into measure 4, when I go into measure 4, I'm adding more notes. But at the time we're at the final measure, I do this slide up, and I'll just kind of sit there and hold that note out. At first, I went like this. So I do that slide up, but I move away from it very quickly. Later on, I do the same exact phrase, I do the same exact slide up, but I hold that note out. It kind of builds this familiarity to the song. It builds this storyline to the solo by doing the same exact phrase with a very, very subtle difference. I think repetitive phrases are one of the best things you can do. Done right, repetitive phrases are so much better than always having a new phrase. It almost sounds like you're just wandering around randomly if you have new phrases at all times. When you hit weird notes like this, it has more potency because it's stronger. You didn't hit these notes before. It sounds purposeful. It almost adds intrigue. It's like, what is going on? That's a little weird. Because we were setting a stage in one direction and it was sounding familiar, and we throw that in there that it's unfamiliar. It actually stands out so much more. Now, one thing I thought was kind of hidden into this phrase here is this sound of higher in pitch, down in pitch, higher in pitch, down in pitch. Because we're getting this. Right, that's how, honestly, if we analyze what's going on there, we have our kind of key melody note, and then it descends. Next, we have two walk-up notes, which are actually descending, and then we go up here. We're hitting the kind of melody note and descending down. So there's almost this repetitive nature. Which almost adds a little bit of familiarity. Even though it's different notes, it has this familiar kind of sound to it. So it makes it kind of hit a little bit better in the context of the solo. That's kind of what's going on with that basic little solo right there. By analyzing the notes, we can see that staying on the same note doesn't mean the sound is the same. As the chords change, the intervals are changing and the sound's changing. So it's totally cool to hold the note out super long or hit the same note over and over again, because at different times of the progression, it's going to sound different. And also, we need to make sure to build some level of familiarity with the phrasing. So either directly repeating the phrase at different times, or almost repeating it, having the similar feel, but maybe changing how you start, how you end, or something like that, just to make it sound familiar and consistent. Because just wandering around the scales and all this other stuff is not going to really land us where we want to be. Also hidden in this is the willingness to, number one, hold out notes. Number two, don't play for a second. Sometimes there's a couple rests throughout this little melody here that allows for time and space to kind of happen. Let the rhythm track do its thing for a moment, and then you come in with a story. Think about a singer. Singers have to breathe. They literally have to. Most singers do a phrase, and there's tons of time in between where they're letting the band just kind of play, and then they come in with their next line of the verse or chorus, right? This can be manipulated later on, which is one of the reasons I think guitar is so cool. Done right with contrast, it's cool sometimes to limit the breaths or extend them, and it adds kind of depth to the storyline. But most of us start off phrasing and we don't have any breaths. We're just wandering the fretboard and scales with no breaks, no holding notes out, no literally taking your hands off the guitar and taking a breath. So I think like a singer and take a break and let the rhythm section do what it wants to do, and then you come in with your next phrase. And that perfectly leads me into the next topic, and that's how to practice phrasing, specifically this more simplified of phrasing. That nothing today was complex or technical or anything like that, but how do we practice it? The first thing is the breaths and taking breaks and holding notes. And the simplest way to me is just put on a backing track and think like a singer and be like, okay, if I sing this phrase, would I need to breathe now? And if I do, then you should take a breath, right? So let's put on the track and practice that real quick. Right, just taking breaks, simple phrases, not doing too much, not being crazy, but take a pause, take your hand off the guitar literally, or just hold a note out. It sounds so much better when we do that, as opposed to doing something like this. Right? It's cool to like be able to do that, but it's fatiguing sounding. There's no storyline. That was just a bunch of random notes. There was no actual story being told. It's unrelatable. It's just this constant flow of sounds happening. It's not really what we want to be doing when we're phrasing. Or the next thing that you really need to practice, and it's like a point to kind of be made, is one of the most important things to be aware of when you're phrasing is where resolution is. If someone's never soloed before, I just kind of show them some scales and maybe some lick ideas or something, some phrase ideas. And then the next step is to always find resolution. And then what usually happens is they start always resolving to the root. So that's like the first thing. So in this case, you'd be resolving everything to the E note, which I'll demonstrate in a second. Then the next step is they'll start resolving everything to the chords that's happening at the time, which is cool. It's a step in the right direction. But the problem is, it's hard to tell a good story when we're always resolving. We're always hitting the resolution point. It really just closes off the storyline. It's like saying bye in a conversation. All right, bye, have a good day. It just cuts it off. So resolution is very, very important to know. Like, you need to know all resolutions at all times. But it's not because you need to be hitting them, it's because you need to know when to avoid them. Now, the next one is, I'm going to show you, is resolving to each chord as they happen, which I think is probably the worst phrasing. I think that actually sounds pretty good, because what ends up happening, because I'm only resolving to E and the chords are still moving, so I'm actually not hitting resolution at every time. I'm only hitting it over the E chord, but there's 3 bars in between every E chord, so there's 3 bars that E note's not resolving. So it actually sounds kind of cool. Here's every chord. It still sounds good. It's good to do that, and you can tiptoe in and out of that in your solo, but only resolving to the root kind of sounds a little boring. So anyways, the point is, be very, very cautious and know where resolution is so you can avoid it or land on it at different times. Now, there's this big concept called call and response phrasing, which I think you should learn and practice. But the bigger thing in my mind, I like to look at it as storytelling. So call and response phrases, you might have some literal call, and then some kind of response, and then another call or something, another response. That's really, really good. But sometimes it's better just to draw a picture of the story, and just envisioning that is really, really good. Now, what's good about the call and response phrasing is it almost makes you take breaths. Like, it makes you envision a pause between one person talking and another person talking, which makes you breathe, makes you hold notes out, which is a really good thing about call and response phrasing. But think about the story. Think about a plot of, there's a scene happening right here, and there's a conversation that happens with that scene, but then there's another scene that happens over here that's kind of pushing in the direction of the storyline. That will help you kind of build intensity with your solo, and also know when to bring it back down intensity-wise, or bring it up again, and kind of flow with the changes. When you think of the overall storyline, I think that really, really helps out. It goes with call and response phrasing. Now, the next thing that's really important to know about phrasing, it's super, super important, is the strongest sound that you can really kind of convey is hitting a resolution on a strong beat, particularly when just the downbeat. 1, 2, 3, 4 are typically all strong beats, but like particularly we'll say the downbeat, right? Hitting resolution on the downbeat is probably the strongest thing you can do. And the reason I say that is you need to be in control of that. Another thing I see a lot of guys do is they always hit strong beats, and they always hit resolution on strong beats. And that makes your story close. It's another way of closing off your story. So we need to know it and be able to do it, so we can also do the opposite. So we can hit on weaker beats. And you can practice just hitting right on. But then also practice the opposite. Right? In mid-phrase, you should manipulate this. Have some phrases that are in between, and then some phrases that are really locked on, and it creates this natural flow and contrast that's really interesting and really helps you tell your story. Next thing is when you're practicing, I always think it's best to start off with trying to find the simplest phrase that sounds really good. Like literally try to take all the nuance, cool stuff out of it and try to see if you could tell a story with 3 notes, 2 notes, 4 notes in one zone of the fretboard. Like try to simplify it as much as possible and see how interesting you can make it. It might look something like this. See, that gets hard. It gets boring, but it's a good challenge to give yourself 2, 3 notes, maybe build out to 4 notes, and like just see what you can do. And give yourself random notes. Like I could do another pass of that and give me completely different notes to try to mess around with. And when you can tell a decent story with a very minimum notes, when you open up yourself to the whole fretboard, your stories just become so much better because of that. All right, so that's everything for today. I hope you got a lot out of today, and it really helps show you how to practice and develop better phrasing with these 5 key points to really keep in mind at all times. All right, I hope you got a lot out of today's video. I'll see you next time.